If you're growing your own tomato seedlings this year, you've got to watch this video. We're going to be covering some of the most critical yet simple steps that you have to take to make sure that your tomato seedlings give you the most beautiful and bountiful harvest possible. We're going to be including timestamps for all of the different sections of today's video, so if you're looking for that information, feel free to jump ahead. The first thing that we're going to be going through is the soil. Then we're going to be talking about the fertilizer. After that, we're going to be talking about planting the tomatoes deep. Along with planting tomatoes deep is going to be the mycorrhizal fungi. We cannot forget this step. It is so critical. And lastly, we're going to be talking about the continued care that you're going to give your tomato seedlings after this point. This video is all about what you should do when your tomato seedlings are about 6 to 8 inches tall. This is the point where we want to transplant them into a larger container if you've been growing them in a seed starting kit like we did with ours. Man, just these are some beauties this year. They are doing so well. Very, very excited. What are we growing here?
Tomatoes.
Are they the best? They're the greatest tomatoes. How do we grow good tomatoes?
With a lot of love.
With lots of love. Okay, as promised, we're gonna talk about the soil first. I like to pre-mix my soil into this little container so it's easy to grab out and to fill up the red solo cups when transplanting. The soil mixture. Pretty important, but not the most important step because they're only gonna be in the soil so long. We've got a little bit more emphasis on the development of the root and the health of those roots at this point. But the soil mixture that I absolutely love using is actually about a 50-50% mix of an indoor potting mix and an outdoor potting mix. The reason why I mix these two is because I find an outdoor potting mix is a little bit too dense for the tomato seedlings. So by including some of that indoor mix, we can kind of create a little bit more of a loamy mixture for the tomatoes. They're gonna like that a lot more than a really dense soil mixture. Next up is the fertilizer. Fertilizer is very critical at this point. If you haven't seen my last video on fertilizing your seedlings, your vegetable seedlings, ornamental seedlings, all kinds of seedlings, basically, it is beneficial to start fertilizing your seedlings once they develop their true sets of leaves because they're going to start looking for much more nutrients at that point so they can start developing the base, the strength. The true foundation of the plant at this point is getting built. So we want to support that as much as we can. So fertilizers that I love using. This Dr. Earth fertilizer, this is the pure gold all-purpose fertilizer. You can use this on seedlings, you can use this on mature plants outside in the ground. It's very versatile. It's got a ton of extra ingredients and bacteria as well, mycorrhizal fungi, super critical. So I will leave the link in the description down below for this. And then there's this Fox Farm Grow Big. The Fox Farm Grow Big liquid fertilizer, also very beneficial for all kinds of applications throughout the entire year. When applying fertilizers like this Grow Big or the Pure Gold, make sure you look at the instructions on the back on how to apply it. They are all going to have slightly different instructions, so we don't want to inadvertently damage our seedlings during this step. So refer to the back always before applying. Next up. Okay, I know I didn't really include this in my timestamps, but these are the containers that we're gonna be growing them in. These are just plain old red solo cups. At this point, I love transplanting my seedlings, specifically tomatoes, squash, cucumbers, some of my larger vegetables in these red solo cups. They're very cheap, but the only drawback is that they're not recyclable. Being a number 6 polystyrene, I think is what number 6 is, really is never gonna get recycled. So that's the only drawback to this. I'm sorry, Earth, but it's just too convenient to pass up for these tomato seedlings. Otherwise, you can buy reusable containers that are about, maybe go ahead and buy like a 3-inch container. That would be perfect. Even if you want to go up to a 4-inch container and you don't have a ton of seedlings to grow, that would be just fine as well. So a quick tip when growing in these red solo cups is that obviously we need drainage holes, right? So all we're gonna do is take a stack of these cups and a drill bit, get the stack of cups to be the depth of that drill bit, just like so. Then all we have to do is drill a hole and we've got a whole stack of cups ready to go. I prefer multiple 1/4 inch holes, but otherwise if you've got like a 3" or 3/8 inch drill bit, one hole down the center of all of these guys will be just fine. Again, this is only going to be for a couple more weeks until we can get them growing outdoors. Okay, even though we are only growing these for a few more weeks inside or in these containers, does not take away how critical this step is. Because we're burying these tomatoes deep, we're going to start and develop an incredible root structure that we didn't have before. So again, this is very critical for the success of our tomato seedlings later down the line. Next step is going to be burying the tomatoes deep. We've got our soil mixture ready and prepped with the fertilizer inside of it. Now we're going to transfer the tomato seedlings into our red solo cups. I can already hear the comments coming, even though I've never had comments on this before. It seems to be a really hot topic this year. The plastic that we're growing these in is gonna leach into my tomatoes, blah, 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 cause all sorts of damage. It's really not. Again, this is such a short period of time. It's not gonna matter. And guys, people grow their vegetables in rubber tires, and you're gonna tell me that these cups that you drink out of are going to cause some negative health effects? No. By the time these tomatoes get in your mouth, this is probably going to be one of the least of your worries. You're much more likely to have high contamination levels of heavy metals, leads, stuff like that inside of your native soil. So it is always important to check your soil if you haven't already done so. I always recommend it if you aren't growing with a soil that you brought into the property. Native soils, unfortunately, are oftentimes contaminated throughout the building process, the many years of paint that might be on your house, or just the overall construction of the neighborhood and or the roads that are around you. All kinds of sources of lead and heavy metals can be in the soil. So don't let this worry you, because there's all sorts of other things that you got to be worried about, and because these are made for drinking out of. Okay, sorry, that rant done with. On to planting deep without being distracted this time. The reason why we plant deep is because these tomatoes will develop roots all along the areas that are buried. So I'm gonna take this tomato seedling right here and bury it just about up to the first set of true leaves. Then what that creates essentially is now about 6 inches of a root base that I'm gonna be working with now. Instead of this small little root ball down at the bottom that we've got here currently, we're now going to just about create 2.5 times that inside of this red solo cup. Planting deep can be done at just about any stage of your tomatoes' life as well. So we might plant deep today, and we might also plant them even deeper in about 3.5, I guess, depending on the weather, weeks from now when we plant them outside. I can also lay them sideways and get even more surface area in the ground that's gonna develop roots. Now, I think that's a little bit carried away at that point. Basically, I'll just do a second deep planting. So I'll have these growing in here, and then I will put them an additional maybe 3 inches below the soil after this point. So our overall root base is going to be about 9 to 12 inches in total by the time they get into the soil, which is rather incredible, starting off with seeds to a nice abundant root structure. Very, very critical. So that is why we plant deep. Now, a part of this process is going to be the addition of our mycorrhizal fungi. This specific mycorrhizal fungi is from Earthman Living Soil. I bought a bunch of this stuff last year. He actually sent me some samples too. I absolutely love it. It did a really good job. And for some reason, mycorrhizal fungi is a little bit difficult to come across in your average greenhouse. I just don't know if people aren't aware of it. Maybe the greenhouses and the gardeners in there are, obviously, they know about it, but the average consumer hasn't quite caught on yet to adding mycorrhizal fungi. This, in my opinion, out of everything that we're doing today, is the most critical step when planting deep and transplanting, as well as when planting in the garden. Because if we don't have mycorrhizal fungi, we don't have these critical social networks, these webbed networks of nutritional supplements going to the plant. That's really what mycorrhizal fungi does. It creates an interstate system, a communication system for your plants to talk to the microbes and the bacteria in the soil. It sounds like woo-woo stuff. It sounds like it's not real, but it is absolutely freaking credible when you realize what mycorrhizal fungi does to the soil. Without living soil, we are all dead. Without living soil, we cannot create and sustain life on this planet. And mycorrhizal fungi has a huge part in that. If it weren't for mycorrhizal fungi, whoo, ain't none of us gonna be a fun guy. So how do I apply this mycorrhizal fungi? Now again, some mycorrhizal fungi might be different, but this is in a powder form that is meant to be added around the roots during a transplant. What I'll do is just take a little bit of it in my fingers and then sprinkle it all around the base of the plant. Maybe just about, I would say like a teaspoon, if that, probably even less than that. Really just a pinch of this little pixie dust is all it takes on each one. Then again, what I will do is set the plant all the way down to the bottom of this red solo cup. So my first set of true leaves is just showing. I could go even deeper, but the cups are only so big. I'm not gonna destroy the root structure to bring the plant down to develop more root structure. Obviously, that's redundant and ridiculous. So this is as deep as this plant will go at this point. Making sure you can see that okay. Now I will repeat this process with all of my other tomato seedlings. Obviously, you guys don't need to see me pot all of these up, so I'll show you now very clearly what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take our 2 fingers and hold this thing just like that, and then go around and add soil. We are not going to tamp down the soil very much. Again, we want the soil to be a little bit more loamy, not very dense. That way the mycorrhizal fungi and the roots have a very nice, comfortable environment to grow in. So make sure you have the soil about 1/2 inch below the top of your cup. That way you've got some room for watering if you do water from the top. And so just like that, we have a tomato seedling that is ready to begin thriving like nobody's business. You know, I really, really love tomato seedlings and growing them because it's just like, it's just a breath of fresh air. I love the smell of these tomato seedlings as they're growing up. It is like a nice, herby, aromatic smell. I remember the first time I grew tomato seedlings, that was one thing that really stuck out to me was the smell. And to this day, I still love it. All right, everybody, just like that, these were the most critical steps when growing your tomato seedlings and transplanting them into their next size container. Make sure you do all of these things when growing your tomatoes to ensure that they are as healthy as possible. Now that we've got our tomatoes potted up here, the next thing we're going to be talking about is the continued care of them. We want to keep them under a lot of light from this point, typically about 9 to 12 hours, depending on the wattage of the light that you have. I've got 600 watt grow lights, I've got 1,000 watt grow lights. I've grown tomatoes under both of them do well. I've grown tomato seedlings under 300 watt grow lights, and those also do just fine. Hi, what are you doing?
Dad's picking me up.
Picking you up? It is going to be rather difficult to give your tomato seedlings too much light, but just to give you some reference for lighting, if you've got a 600 watt grow light or whatever, 300 watt, typically you're going to keep it about 12 inches off the top of the foliage of your seedlings, and they'll do just fine. If they start to wilt, there's all sorts of issues. You cannot just narrow that down to lighting or watering or fertilization. You've got to look at all the different habits that you've had with your seedlings so far, and then maybe you can deduce what the possible issue is. But my point is that they're going to start needing more and more light at the stage compared to when they were tiny little seedlings. Those cotyledon leaves just coming out of the surface of the soil really don't need a lot of light, but now they do. As far as watering schedule goes, you still need to make sure that these stay moist. You're essentially going to be watering them maybe once every 2 to 3 days. Sometimes you can wait a little bit longer if you don't have a fan on them because the humidity, the moisture is not going to be evaporated out as fast. A really quick recipe for disaster for these tomato seedlings or any vegetable seedlings is going to be letting them dry out. So we don't want them to dry out. And lastly, I guess we'll talk about temperature ranges because these do like to stay warmer at this point. If you could keep your temperatures in between 70 and 75 degrees, great. But they can also be a little bit warmer than that as well, up to about 80. But once you're going above 80 degrees, you start to risk some other issues with the tomatoes. So the Goldilocks range is between 70 and 75 degrees for these. So I, growing them down in my basement, don't have this luxury. And right now it's probably about 68, maybe even colder than that, 65 to 68 degrees right now in the basement, and they still do just fine. So if you don't have a heat pad, if you don't have a heated area to grow them in, don't fret. They're probably going to be just fine as long as you keep an eye on your watering and your light schedule that you give them, because as long as they got those, they can kind of deal with some colder temperatures. You know, they're going to be growing outside when it's 45, 55 degrees out at nighttime. So they can also do that indoors. Even though it's not ideal, it is certainly possible. With that, until we plant these tomatoes outside, we're not going to be doing anything different with them. So we will catch you in the next video with these tomato seedlings. In the meantime, we've got all sorts of other vegetables growing indoors. We've got vegetable seeds going outside. We've got perennial flowers, ornamental, annual flowers going, fruit trees, indoor house plants. We're going to be trying to include and film as much as we can this spring because there's just so much happening. I want to include you in on all of the fun. I want to thank all my returning subscribers, and for those of you who have not yet subscribed, I greatly implore you to, and hope that you find this community fun, entertaining, and hopefully educational as well. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next episode.